My name's Darshini Shah. I'm the product manager here with K3 SYSPRO, and today I am joined by Nick Trevor, who I'm sure many of you have already worked with over the years. He's come from our consulting team and is very well versed in the low-code part of SYSPRO, and that's really the focus for today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick to talk us through some of the things you can do with customization on the low-code side. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Darshini. Okay, I'm going to turn my webcam off as I'll be presenting, so you don't want to get distracted by me. So let's go from there. Right, so today's agenda is basically to go through some of the low-code aspects of SYSPRO. Now, when I say low-code, there's going to be some coding in this, so not for the faint-hearted. Hopefully you'll learn a lot about it. So I want to go through some user stories that I come across on site that we've found solutions for, and some of those ideas I've dumbed down a tiny bit to make them a bit simpler to understand the concepts of them, and hopefully you'll get a lot from this. So the first part of I've broken this down into user stories. So like I say, each one of these models that I'm going to go through is based on a user story. So on this particular one, what I want to do is show you how you can tailor SYSPRO's sales order entry screen to feed back to the user and simplify the processes. In this case, as a sales clerk, what the customer wants to be able to do is alert the users if they were selling outside of their standard box sizes. So if I was selling in 10s and the sales clerk tried to order, say, 12, SYSPRO would automatically tell the user that they were ordering in the wrong quantity. Now, there's a few ways you can do this without any customization. You might use order unit to measure to manage this instead, but quite a lot of people price in the stocking unit measure. Adding the order unit measure is quite complex and adds a whole dimension that you might not necessarily need when your simple use case is to sell in your stocking unit measure all the time, especially when it comes to your documentation. You want it to print the correct values. So without further ado, I'm going to go into SYSPRO and we're going to step through how we build this process. So from my SYSPRO main menu, I'm going to go into my sales order entry program. Okay, so go past the reserve stock and I'm going to just start simulating adding an order. Okay, now first things first is I need to get access to my box quantity field. Now, box quantities is just it's a custom form field for me. It's not a concept SYSPRO has natively built in there. So what I have done, I've added a custom form field against the stock code record called box quantity. So I'm going to drag that on. And now you can see it's available. I'm going to start adding a line and checking everything is right. Once I tab off my A100, you can see it's pulling through my box quantity of 10. So there's my value. Now, if I start adding this, I've got no logic that determines what that is to stop the user from saving an order. So I can go through and save an order as it stands. So I want to now build that logic in. So what I'm actually going to do, a lot of people would build this when the quantity gets changed. I'm going to build this on the submit function, and I'll explain why. So what I'm going to do is right click into my grid here. So you'll notice each of these forms have a different code. So make sure if you attempt this, you are right clicking in the correct area. And then this will bring through my VB script window. So VB scripts are built into SYSPRO to allow you to kind of enhance the functionality. And you'll have come across these probably already during consultancy sessions with us. In SYSPRO 8, it's slightly different. It goes straight to the screen. If you're on SYSPRO 7 or 6.1, it'll be slightly different. You'll have to there'll be one screen before this. For me, on SYSPRO 8, I've got to go to events, and I'm going to piggyback off the on submit event. So this event is fired as soon as I hit that save icon on the sales order entry screen. And what I want to do is add in logic now that picks up my box quantity field. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of coding here and try and hopefully you'll follow along. So I need to declare some variables. So variables in coding language is just somewhere to store a value. and I just want to pick them up. So I need to get my box quantity value, and I also want to get my order quantity value. And then I want to then initialize these. So my box equals my, hopefully this is available here now, on my stock code, stock line information pane, I should have, and I might have to go out and back in to get this. I think I will, because I added it to the screen a second ago. So let me come back to that one to fill in some of the bits of code first. My stock line entry, I need to bet my order quantity. So that's what I'm adding in. And then I'll piggyback. So I'm just going to come out of the program and come back in a sec. So here.
So just as you're doing that, Nick, one of the things that you pointed out was the fact that you're doing this in SYSPRO 8, but it is available. The macros are available from SYSPRO 7 as well. So you can go in and do that across multiple screens. Some of the things that watch out for is get out of the car, get back in order for things to be available.
Correct, yeah. So hopefully I can see this now. Where are you? So I've got the wrong stock line information pane. Where are you? I think I can, there it is. So I'm looking in stock code information. Helps when you look in the right place sometimes. Okay, so I've got my two variables available to me. So I just need to do some basic maths now to basically initiate this logic. The first thing it's always good to do is check the value if it's 0 and then exit the function, because if I don't have a box quantity, then there's no logic to apply. So good practice is to also always check if it's 0 or a silly value, whatever you've kind of determined is the right value. Now I just want to do a basic calculation which says if my quantity entered divided by my box quantity is equal to a rounded quantity of the same value. So I do quantity ends divided by box. So what I'm saying here is if this is true, this will round to a full number. So if my decimal, that rounds to a decimal and it's not equal to a whole number, then I'm definitely not multiplying it by the box. So my value is incorrect. Now, what I'm going to do on that, sorry, if it is equal to the num, that's correct. If it was not equal to, so at that point, it's good. So if I get past this if statement now, I know I'm actually stepping into territory where I'm not within the box quantity. So what I want to now do is say, give the user some input that says my order quantity is not equal to my box quantity, and you can make this a lot more informative than what I'm doing. I'd just like to give it a little title. This is just a little message box that appears. So that's what the user's going to see. Like I say, I can add more variables to give the user more information. And then there's a little trick you can apply inside SYSPRO, which is to say, set the function back to false. And what that will do, it will stop the save from happening. Without that, I'll just get a message box and it'll save. So that's not what I want. I want to actually stop when I hit the enter message box up and tell the user or stop the order from actually being committed into the database. So hit the syntax check button to make sure I've not made any obvious errors. That's not to say I've not made an error somewhere in this code. That will soon be prevalent when I hit the save button. So let's try it out. So again, let's just give it a PO number, stock line, FG, and fill in F100. So 10. So let's put 11 in. So we know that that order quantity is incorrect. And if I hit save, I'm now getting my error message. And you see when I hit OK, nothing's being committed to my order lines pane because I've stopped the save. Now, if I try 20 and hit save, I get to my normal OK standard SYSPRO prompt that allows me to then add the order. You see it's now been added as 20. So just by using a macro alone, I'm able to stop the clerk from being able to save the order, and I'm able to ensure that I've actually applied my business rules to it. So it's a nice simple way you can actually, use custom form fields to enhance the user experience when you're entering orders. And this logic can be applied to, like I say, almost any form that's going. So you can put it to the order header, But obviously that doesn't have a save, that'll be initiated on the end order. You just need to kind of look what's available to you in the screens that you're trying to enhance the user experience on. So that's a little simple one that we kind of do in a lot of places. Like I say, you could have also done it when the order quantity was changed, which means they'd get that feedback as soon as they tabbed away from the order quantity field. And that will just give them, the alert up further up front. Okay, so that's my first user story. End order, go out that. So that's your first little introduction into VB scripting in SYSPRO. My next one is going to be a bit more complicated. What I've set up is a workflow that will utilize lots of the functionality that we talked about in the last webinar. We're going to talk about e-signatures. I'm going to talk about some business objects and that kind of thing. We're going to bring it all together to create this workflow. So in this particular story, what I'm trying to do is enhance the supplier creation process by saying, as standard, it will go on hold, and then I need someone to go and approve that and take the supply of hold to the free for use. So you can imagine someone's going to enter the order in SYSPRO, and I'm going to actually video this one out a little bit. So what we're going to have is when the supply is added, they're going to go on hold. So we need to achieve that through a macro in the form. The next step, we're going to have a notification to the FD that says, X supply has gone on hold. Now, I'm not actually going to do this one today because that one could be achieved through no code that I showed in the last webinar. So please go back to that if you need to, and you'll be able to work out how to do that kind of notification. What I then need to do is basically add it to the FD's to-do list, which is a concept in SYSPRO that you might have not used before. So I'll explain that as we go along. So this is just basically a task list where it goes into, and then they can use that to kind of process it. And what I need to then do is kind of enhance that entire experience by making it easy for the FD to manage. So this is kind of the workflow I want to do. So let's go and into SYSPRO and let's concentrate on putting the supply on hold when it's added. So I'm going to achieve this again through a macro. You could achieve this through an e-signature as well. There's always multiple ways to cut the same cloth. So I'm going to go into setup and suppliers. So I'm going to just start giving myself, actually I'm going to copy a supplier and call it 995, which would be a new one, and just keep the same values, just a little trick so I don't have to fill in all this information again. Give it a new value. And what I need to do is actually when the user enters this form, I need this tick to be preset and I need it to be disabled. So the user doesn't have any choice but to add it as on hold. So I'm going to achieve that again using a macro. So I'm going to go into events and I'm going to do when they start editing the form. Now I usually start edit because that's when everything in the form has been initialized rather than on refresh. You can get into some interesting behavior when you do on refresh sometimes. That will just mean all the values on the right hand side are available and have been filled in. And what I need to do now is basically say, is it's a new supplier, and if it is a new supplier, make sure that field is already pre-checked. So what I actually need to do is reach out to the database to see if 995, which is the supplier I've just started adding, exists already. So I'm actually going to use, again, you can do this a few ways. I'm actually going to use a business object to achieve this called ComFND. Business objects, for those who don't know, are just simple, or basically APIs into the SYSPRO backend that allows you to post sales orders, bring out data, do all sorts of things. And SYSPRO makes it easy to actually run them using this code generation. So I'm going to click on code generation. I'm going to go call, and what I am doing is I'm going to use a query, and it's going to be ComFND. Oops. Come through right. Sorry, that's wrong. So I'm going to push that into there. And so I'm just going to simplify some of my code. So this is basically looking at the SYSPRO database. Now, I showed you in the last webinar the data dictionary, so you can use that data dictionary to understand some of the table structure and find out what values you'd have to populate into this business object. What it's expecting is this XML in, and I need to basically populate it with the data from the grid. So I'm going to simplify this a bit. So I only have one expression, which is where the supplier is equal to it. I'm only looking for a single row, so I don't need an order by. And I'm actually going to reach out to AP supplier, which I know is where my supplier data is held. And all I need to do is reach out and find if the supplier exists. So I just need one column. For those who know SQL, that's just going to do select supplier from AP supplier where this condition is true. So I'm going to supplier equals, and this is where I need to be a little smart. I need to inject the supplier from the form. Okay, so I need to then say from the form itself, here's my supplier name, my supply code that I've entered. So click there, and I can double click and that inserts it in. So far so good. I've got a business object call that reaches out to the table and finds out if it exists. Now I need to use the results of that to manipulate the form. So you'll notice at the top, I create a lot of function files to make when I use a common function. So this is just what I use. You might already have it on your database, but this just allows me to go if return top value. So I get basically the output from this is an XML file. So I need to parse that and get the value from inside it. So I am just going to reach out to that file, which is stored in my XML out. I'm sorry, what I'm doing. XML out, and then I need to just find if it exists. And I'm going to say if equals blank, then I know it doesn't exist. Else do this and if. And then I'm going to use the same technique I did before in the last one. Well, it's actually slightly different. I'm going to say supply on hold. I'm going to do equals my new value. So field properties, I'm going to put a value of 1, which is ticked, 0 is unticked. And what I want to do is say I want it to be read only, so the user can't actually manipulate it. I'm going to copy the same block down, put it here, but rather than zip, well, I can just set that to be false because I want it to be available if they're maintaining it. Okay, so syntax check. So that is my full code at the minute now. So I reach out to the database and finding if the customer, the supplier exists, and then I'm applying logic on the back of that. So let's save. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to come out and come back in and start. I'm going to pick up a existing supplier. So let's untick, not grayed out. Good. Put this in, run it, grayed out, ticked. So as soon as I have this now order, supply is going to go in on hold. So I've achieved my first step. So I'm going to save that, and I can just integrate to my content management system and save that. Okay, good. Now, nothing's happened now. I've not triggered any events to say, oh, new supplier's added, go and tell someone or go and add it to the FD's to-do list. So that's what I need to achieve next. So like I said, the event that I explained first about emailing the FD, you can go away and do that based on the webinar last, because we talked about email notifications there. For this one, what I want to do is add it to SYSPRO's to-do list system. And there's a bit of consultancy I'm going to give you here now. So here's my to-do list. Now you can get into here, which will kind of show it all, or there's actually a program called to-do list, which I've added to my favorites. So the idea is I want to get it into here with a nice and tidy subject, due date, and some actions. So this is where I'm talking about making it easy for the FD to process it. So to-do lists are built on the back of workflow actions. So these are found in the workflow module. You don't have to be licensed for this very finite area of it, because Avanti also uses this. You can see this is what I was doing. This is when I was testing before. So I'm going to add a new one, which will emulate what I've done here. So if I do new action, I'm going to call it new supplier and save. And against new supplier, I need to basically create a accept and reject process. So I'm going to add a new line underneath that, and it's going to be a standard link which says accept it. And the action is going to be quite simple. It's going to be calling a SYSPRO program, and the SYSPRO program happens to be going back into supply maintenance. So I've gone into a browse, these are my program lists, and I've just found onto supplier maintenance. I then need to pass in a parameter. When I was testing before, I happen to know that the one I'm going to be is happening to use is for parameter 2. Save line. Okay, so I've got my first option available to me. I'm going to do exactly the same option for reject, and then we'll come back and actually maybe tailor that. And so I'm going to do new line, standard, reject, and I'm going to do what I will do. I'm going to call a VB script that's not going to have anything against it for now, because I don't want them to go anywhere. I just want to kind of maybe fill in a custom form field with a reason or the user who rejected it, something along those lines. You can make this as complicated as you need it to be when you're calling into the VB script. So I'm going to save that line and go from there. So the one thing I need to know is my action ID here, which is that value there. So I've added this to my, using field tuner, I did add the action ID column to it to get that value. So I'm going to come out of there. So now I've set up some of the bone structure I needed. I'm going to go into my electronic signatures now, and I'm going to do a maintain on my company, and I'm going to find my trigger. So again, we talked about e-signatures last time, so hopefully this screen is familiar to you. Again, this is the SYSPRO 8 version. Yours will look slightly different if you're on an early version at 8 or SYSPRO 7. I want to go into accounts payable, and when I add a supplier, I want to edit that, and I want to say when a new supplier has been added, I want to trigger an event. So the little clue that I was talking about, obviously from here you could write to a message inbox or email the user yourself. But now I'm just going to skip that step and move straight into writing it to to-do list. So this is triggered off the back of a VB script. So what I now need to do is say when it basically it's added, I need to run a business object which adds it to the to-do list. So on after success, I'm going to just inject in my common modules file that I use that I showed you before, and this just has functions that I use throughout code. And I'm going to say on after transaction, add the business object call into the, so that is called, so I'm just looking at my notes, remember the message. So it's called transaction SWSTMG. Okay, and I will need to basically populate this from somewhere else. I'm just going to load up something called e.diagnostics that will give you a brief intro into, because I also use this to generate some of the code stubs. And if I just put in my business object, so this is just a test harness that allows me to basically test business object calls outside of the VB script engine. I use it religiously, even to add data into SYSPRO. So I'm just going to generate a bit of VBS from here as well. I inject that in. So I don't need that anymore. Okay, so we just post a message. The other thing we also need from this is the parameter file. So I just take out this just to make it a bit cleaner, a bit easy to read. And these are the two bits of information I need to basically post into the to-do list. Okay, so you can see here I've got some things to fill in. So I need to put a date created. That's obviously not valid, so I'm going to just put in some little blocks of code here, just so, which I'll fill in. And expiry date, again, that'll be expiry time. I'm not too bothered about. I'll probably just keep that at midday or something. It's SYSPRO status. I can use this to find out what some of the information means. You can see status is 1, action required. So this is just a nice little way to drill into some of the schema behind the business objects as well. And my action ID, if you remember, was my value from before, 10,005. And then I'm going to add in a subject, which has a bit more meaningful information, and my message, I might just put new supplier for now. Okay, and I'm adding it, and that's the main part of my stub. Okay, so what I need to do is just fill in some information here. Now this does there is a slight obviously complication with using dates. So I did kind of build up some additional functions to do this. I just remembering the name. So yeah, that's it. So I need to do the date created, which happens to be a business object date. So this is just a function that returns the date format that is required. Now is a common function that VBScript understands is the current date. And I need to just populate the same thing down here, which happens to be the time in the format it expects. And I will use the current date as the expiry, but I might add on, 31 days. And the action is there. Subject will be new supplier, and then I will inject that in from my variables over here. And I'm going to use the actual kind name, the supplier name. And then that will go through. Now, the last thing I do actually need is, and I think I might have actually deleted it by accident, is the workflow key. Okay, so I also need that value. Let me just add another thing in here. And that'll be workflow key. And that is the new supplier code that I'm going to build off the back of the to-do list to enhance. So if I now put in my supplier code, which happens to be the key, that should then do it. Okay, so what I'm doing is adding it to my action that I've created, that value can be hard-coded. I filled in the extra date, and I'm sending it to my operator admin. I could alternatively send it to a whole role, and they'd all get the action. And simple as that. I know it doesn't sound that simple, but I'm going to syntax check that and save. And sorry, it's already done, so it's saved. I'm going to come out there, save that, come out, and I will exit SYSPRO. So I will now reopen SYSPRO. E-signatures always require you to come out and back in. Okay, and I will now need to go back through my process of adding a new supplier to trigger it. So again, I'm going to set up new supplier. I'm going to use my cheat that I showed you before. I'm going to do the 994, retain existing values, change the name slightly. And you can see on hold, if I hit save, oh, I've got a variable undefined. Okay, I know what I've done. I've made an issue with my business object call. So again, if you get any errors in your coding, you'll soon know about it. So it will warn you. So I now just going to finish this process and refix my code. I know where I went wrong already. So I'm going to go back into, this is the beauty of coding, that you will always get hung up on something, no matter how good you are. Now, if I static trigger and go back into here, I just need to fill in my parameter is actually called parameter, and my document is actually called document. That's because I used E.NET to generate these stubs, and they wasn't expecting that. So that should now work.
That's a good point, though. Always remember to test after you put it in. Don't let it loose on your end users without doing that.
Would we ever do that, Parshni?
No.
No.
No, and no one on this particular webinar would either.
No, I can imagine. Test and sandbox is first as well, obviously. Okay, so back into login, like I've made a change to my signature, so I have to come back out and back in, and let's have attempt 2 at this process. SYSPRO load up and back into my program list, accounts payable, set up suppliers, and again 995. I'm going to try it on 993. New supplier, give a new name, tick by default, save. Okay, no error this time, happy days, create new contact. I'm just going to link it to an existing contact and come out. So hopefully, all things being equal, if I go into my to-do list and refresh it, I've now got an item to work on. Phew, it worked. So you can see here I've got action required, and based on my approve button, it's now just going to jump straight into my supplier maintenance screen, and I can untick supplier on hold and off I go. That gives me a little process flow that I want to build in. So if I save that, just a little moment, and then I can dismiss my notification. So once I've completed the task, obviously the reject, I have not tied any logic to that. So you can think of the other things you can do off the back of that, which I won't go into today with the interest of time. But from there, I would be able to go into reject, change it. I can put a script off the back of that then might call a business object that posts a custom form field for the reject reason and dismisses the message. Just for brevity, I'm going to put a simple message box in that says supplier rejected. So you can see that working in action. Like I say, I just like to fill with my little icons rather than a blank message box. So fill that in, hit save, come out, and I left it in my to-do list. I didn't dismiss it. I could just hit reject, and I should then start seeing that I'm triggering that event. That I can then, I can move on from that. I can post more information back to the person who added the supplier. I could ask the user to enter more information, or I could have simply just gone back to the supplier maintenance and added a reason code is why they were rejected. So that is kind of my little workflow based on the back of a macro, based on e-signatures that we learned about on the last webinar that we did, and a new concept, the to-do list, and adding into that using the business object call. All quite neat. So let's move back into my user stories. So my next one, now it'll be very common for you all to have external third-party systems. Translution is used quite commonly across sites. You might have Orchard, even Data Switch sits in its own database, and they're just for the systems that we implement. You might have your own internal systems that you have developers working on, and quite key to you to sometimes render that data inside SYSPRO. Now you could have always done this through app builders and that kind of thing, and I want to show you a slightly different approach, how you can use the business activity queries that we learned about on the last webinar to pull in that data from those external systems, put it into a tile, and then I'm going to even expand on that even further in my next story. So let's go back into SYSPRO. So what I need to do is build a new business activity and then a new tab on top of that. My use case, or my database that I've been working on recently, so I've used it as an example, is a Translution booking in application where users will receive purchase orders. Quite nice and simple. So I am going to, and what that application does, it posts it into a table inside the Translution database. So what I need to do is be able to report on that data inside SYSPRO. So what I'm now going to do is add a business activity query for that. So I'm going to go into my business activity query builder, which again I've added shortcuts to, but obviously it's available in the program list. And I need to define a name for this activity query. So I'm going to call it TL Translution underscore receipts. Okay, so you can see it generates a name for me, BQ. So what the business activity query does in the background, it uses the power of SQL views The reason being it protects you against things like SQL injection and that kind of thing. So it will create that object for you, which then you can actually hook on anywhere else as well as inside tiles and that kind of thing. So I'm going to start building this up now. So I'm going to give it a nice neat description. And what I showed you last time was using the WYSIWYG builder. Now, because we're going into more of a low code, I'm going to actually show you how you can just use direct SQL to generate this. So I'm actually going to select this button this time, which is my custom SQL statement. And you can see this grid at the bottom now becomes available for me to type into. So what I would recommend you do is you generate your SQL inside SSMS first, so that's SQL Server Management Studio. Test it there before applying it into here, because one, you'll get the IntelliSense to fulfill things in, and two, it's a bit easier. So that's how I recommend you develop if you've got access to SMS. If not, then you might just choose to use the WYSIWYG builder. Okay, so I am going to go into here, and I do have, as you can imagine, which is time, a query that I've already built out. The important thing is I've hard coded the name of the database that I am piggybacking into. So this is quite simple. It's looking at a custom table in this database, and it's showing me the receipts that are, between +7 and -7 days. So if I just run that, you can see here, there's my expected output. So like I say, none of this data exists inside the SYSPRO database. It exists in a third-party system. So I'm going to knock that into here, and I'm going to hit validate SQL, which says, things are good. It then has some knowledge to fill in some of the column data, and I can hit preview data to even show that it's working. Okay. So again, if you don't have access to SMS, you could always write it here and use the preview data to see if it's working or not. But you just won't get the benefit of IntelliSense and that kind of thing. So I'm now happy with this view. I'm going to do save, and I'm going to publish it to EduOne. Now, the reason I'm only going to publish it to EduOne is because, yes, I had to hard code the database. It's looking as EduOne. So I'd have to create this view per each company for this process to work. Some customers will use this kind of approach to consolidate SYSPRO companies. So you could even have a consolidated view that looks at 3 different SYSPRO company databases and sums up or shows you the entire order book across all 3. So you just got to kind of think about what other options are available to you. My example in this case is just simply looking across to one of the database. So I'm going to hit continue and hit yes. And since my last one, I upgraded my ports and my error message has gone away. Thank you, SYSPRO. And then I've got my view available here. So now I need to be able to go and use that inside a tile. So we're going to go to our tile definition program, which happens to be on my main menu. And I am going to add a new tile called TLPO receipts. Okay, and I'm just going to let it take a generic automatic ID and hit OK on that. So I'm now going to have to edit the summary. So as we did in the last session, we created a summary tile. And what I'm going to do is change my data source to equal that of my business activity query. So I can come into here and I can just search for BQ underscore. And I believe the latest one I did was this one. No, it wasn't that one, was it? Maybe it was the other one. Sorry, that's the one I tested on before. Let me use the one I've just done, which is that one. There was a slight difference, yeah, that one. Okay, so that's the new one I've just generated, and I need to select a column value for my summary. So I quite like to just add a small bit of code in here which says sum up the quantity to give some sort of feedback, and I'm just going to take a few decimals away from that so it looks a bit prettier. I'm just going to move it to 2 decimal places, and I don't need a condition. It's going to be generic, and I can hit validate SQL and happy days. So that's the SQL, it's automatically generated. And I'm going to do validate SQL and close. So that's what's going to appear at the top of my tile in this value here. And now I just need, basically when I click on the tile, some extra detail. So I'm going to go into edit tile detail. Now, the only difference I'm going to do this time is actually hit the custom SQL query button. And I'm literally going to do a select star. And what that'll do is select every column that's available in my business activity. And SYSPRO have happily applied with no lock statement for me. So I'm going to validate and close. And yeah, validation was successful, and save and close. TL PO sheet is now available. And now I'm just going to add it to my home screen. So customize and hit edit web view. So these tiles, as we spoke about many times, are available in the SYSPRO core app or in Avanti. And I can add it to my home screen just like this. So I'll go into my section that I have already pre-added. You remember I did the supplier balance from the last webinar. And if I hit the add button and just wait for it to generate the form. Okay, there we go. So it is a little slower in the client than Avanti. This is probably working on that performance. And if I hit custom tile, I should see my new one, which I'm going to add in and save. Now, just so it takes effect, I'm going to close out of SYSPRO and I'm going to reopen it. And hopefully, all things being equal, I have a tile that's linking to my Translution database. Okay, so user now we saw before, SYSPRO just kick in, and there we go. Obviously, it's emulating the same number I've got here. I didn't give it any colours, so it's a bit pale, but I can obviously add green and different colours into that. And if I click, I start getting some information. Obviously, I can tidy up these columns by giving them proper aliases. If I put it as purchase space order, I'll start getting the smart links. So I've got a bit of extra work to do there, but ultimately, I've kind of proven my use case in that I've been able to look across, I've been able to write a custom SQL query, add it through into a business activity query in SYSPRO, and then render that into my tiles. So, hey presto, there's my data. And those business activity queries will be built on throughout SYSPRO's lifecycle, so you'll be able to access them from things like OData going forwards. So they're useful to use regardless. So I'm going to then close up here. I'm going to move on to my final use case, which will be a bit quite in depth, but we'll talk through some of the concepts of it. Okay. So my final user story is all about enhancing what I've just done there in my business activities to add actual functionality on top of it. So rather than just showing data, now I want to actually maybe do something with it, something a bit more, a bit more extravagant. Now, tiles themselves are purely reporting tools, so they don't have VB scripts against them. So what I've built out is what we call an application builder in SYSPRO that will allow me to post a custom form field against the supplier, so into the purchase order lines that I've booked in. So in this case, as my supply chain manager wants to do, he wants to add additional comments to the receipts as they come in terms of, he might be checking the quality of the packaging. He might just want to keep a running narration of the booking in process so he can report on that later and he can spot any common themes with that supplier's goods. Are they always late? Are they always damaged? Are they always, X, Y, or Z, or is the quality always differing? So I want to enhance this process. So I'm going to go back into SYSPRO and I'm going to go to administration. Now I have built out this application builder because we wouldn't have time to write it together. So I'm going to go into application builder and I'm going to my webinar rack, duly named, so I know what it's called. And you can see here, I am pulling in the same data that my business activity query is doing. I'm actually looking at the test one I set up before, so we can correct that. So you can see here, I'm looking at BQTL booking in, which is the one I created before, which is my actual valid business activity query. So if I took a note of the name of that, I'd be able to go straight into it. So I'm going to go back into my query builder, and I'm just going to copy the name out of there, and then I'll speak through the code. Okay, so my TL receipts booking in is what I actually, so that's the value that I need. So my webinar app, customized pane, properties, just getting into the VB script, and I will edit it. So again, these application builders are literally, boxes where you can add code into them. When you open them as standard, they'll have literally nothing in there until you start adding in either lists or forms or graphs or any of the sorts of thing that you want to build into it. So I'm going to just change this over to be select star from my activity query. Okay, so what I've got here is I need to build up the grid. Okay, so I've done this in advance. There is a designer you can actually go through, which will bring up a window which you can then add the columns, and then that will generate the code stub for you here. And then basically I've got a link to my purchase order, my purchase order line, my quantity, my delivery note, and the comment is the area that I'm going to enhance the process on. So the comment wasn't something native to the business activity query before, and what I want to do is build that in. So I'm going to set it as edible equals true, which means on the grid I can actually start typing in a value, and with that value, once they enter it, I'm able to go off and do some magic. So first of all, once I've defined my grid, and again, it's important to say if they're alpha or numeric to enable you to sort the grids correctly, I can then set on refresh event that it reaches out to my SQL database. And here I am using what you might have commonly seen is our database functions class, which is just a simple way to access SQL directly. So again, if I run, all it's doing is running this query in the background against my SYSPRO Edu1 database. If I run that, this is what it's going to generate as XML back into the grid. So again, testing SSMS, and that's going to then call in and set the data in the grid as that data. Okay, so let's just check that's worked now. I've made the change here. And you'll notice when I hit refresh, my comment here is gone. So we're actually going to extend on this. What I now need to do, and what I've built in already, and like I say, these take, they don't take too long to build, but they do take time and the thought process. So I'm obviously pre-built this. So when this particular column changes, so I'm saying when the comment column changes, what I want to do is actually, and again, this has been generated through my code generation up here, my ComTFM business object. This is the one that we use to update custom form fields. So what I've actually done is add a comment custom form field to the purchase order line so that I can actually store that data in the SYSPRO database. So when I hit change, it'll go away and it'll post it. And I have got some extra error handling that says, if this fails for any reason, tell the user why. And because the business object works on update or add, I have to check if it has a custom form field or not. So that is why this code exists down here. Again, we can make sure this is available after the session. So I'm going to now test this. So save out here, save, and I'm going to start putting in my new comment. And if I tab off, okay, no error, I've not put in a message box saying it's successful, that'll be pointless. And then I'm going to go to line 30 on purchase order and see that if this has actually posted. Probably should have picked one with one line rather than 30 lines. And I don't have my line field, so again, let's go to my field chooser and find my line number, which will make it a bit easy for me to find. So there's my line up to the last one. And if I look in here, you can see there's my new comment has been posted. You see I successfully managed to post. Now, there is a problem. If I refresh this grid, it now shows that there isn't a comment against the line, but I know for a fact there is. So what I actually now need to do is extend on my business activity query. So now I've defined my process, I know that I need to go back and actually add additional logic into the activity. SYSPRO will allow me to do that. So I can go back into here, I can pick up my view, and what I now need to do is actually join on to the custom form table and pull the comment through as part of the view. So I'm going to just copy it from here and bring it across, and I'll explain that in a second. So I'm just joining on to the Poor Matter Detail Plus table, linking on the purchase order and line number, and then I'm pulling in the comment itself. Okay, so I'm going to do preview data, and you can see now comment is in one of my columns, and there it is, new comment. There's the comment from before, and I can now save and publish that to SYSPRO Company HU1, continue, and it will overwrite my existing view for me. Now, by simply doing that, I can look at my web view. I can look at my peer receipts tile. Suddenly, I've got comments as a new column. Remember, I did select star, so that brings through any columns available. I could have tailored that down further by doing just select purchase order, so it wouldn't have brought through. And if I go into my application builder now, my webinar app, you can see here now it's pulling through my comment field, and I can then start filling that in. Again, query off the back of that onto line 3. I can see in the custom form field section, I've got my new value. So that is, in a nutshell, how you can use the business activity queries to extend out to third-party databases or applications, to then pull in data and then extend that functionality by using the power of application builders to add even more business logic on top of that. I hope it's been useful. So today, the tools that we've used macros, we've used e-signatures, the to-do list, which might be a new concept to you, might not come across that in SYSPRO before. We've used the new latest business activity queries, which, just to reiterate, they are available only in SYSPRO 8. The former to-do list, e-signature macros are SYSPRO 7 features as well, and maybe some of that functionality is also in previous versions. I won't go into the full list of that. And application builders have also been around since, I think it's SYSPRO 6.1 SP2, I think. So they're also available to you. Maybe they will just be slightly more tapered down. There won't be as rich functionality as there is in today in SYSPRO 8. So I will hand back to Darshni to conclude for me.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks. That was very code heavy, but not so code heavy. So you stuck to the low for me. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Just to wrap up really quickly, some of the other things that you want to look at when it comes to learning more about SYSPRO. There are previous webinars that were available as well, associated with the low code, no code. And we had a webinar around API automation without the aggro. We've got 2 more webinars coming up in the next 2 months, July and August. The first one that we've got coming up is optimizing production with the smarter factory. So if you're interested in that, of course, join. If you've got someone that's focused on production, be sure to make sure they are looking out for that in their inbox as well. And then we, believe it or not, will be 20 months post-Brexit come August. So we wanted to revisit some of the things that you should already be doing or think about doing going forward. There's, of course, training. Some of the things that Nick covered today is also covered in the training courses. We wanted to put it in slightly more context. SYSPRO 8 has a huge amount of resources that are available online. In fact, one of the things that Nick showcased was the use of business objects. There's a whole library of that that's available off of the InfoZone website that SYSPRO hosts as well. If you're stuck for help, F1 is always a good place to start. It will at least give you a pointer. And as always, our help desk is available. So before we wrap up and kick off into questions, I just have a quick poll that I want to launch. And the question I've got for you is, will you use something from today's session in your business? So if you could just vote for me on that one, that would be marvelous. Excellent. We've got 83% that have voted. I'm going to close that off. Thank you very much. It looks like at least 90% of the people that have attended today will be able to take something away, which is always great to be able to do that. So if you want to click onto the next slide for me, please. And oh, that's all we have. Thank you. So on to questions. We've got in the Q&A panel, if you haven't already put your questions in, go ahead and do so now. I've got a question that's open here already. The first question is, are workflow actions available in SYSPRO 7?
So yes, they are, aren't they?
They are. The only caveat I would have to that is there is a license association with the workflow actions in SYSPRO 7 because they're tied to the workflow module. So just be aware of that. That seems to have been dropped off by SYSPRO and SYSPRO 8. So it's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to trigger off if you don't have workflow services licensed. The other question that was there, I think you've answered already within the Q&A or within the webinar itself. Are to-do lists available in SYSPRO 7 as well? Nick?
Yeah, yes, they are indeed. They are available there. Again, just be wary of what Josh is saying there, but they are available.
There's no licensing implications associated with a to-do list, so you'll be fine to be able to use that and surface that up. You're just making sure that you're calling it from different areas, not necessarily the workflow actions.
Yeah, you'll notice in the business object call that I use, the SWSTMG, it has a SYSPRO or workflow parameter. So I basically am calling it from SYSPRO to use it as a SYSPRO module, as it were, rather than part of the workflow services.
Perfect. I've got another question here that's come through. This is a good question. This sounds like someone's already on SYSPRO 8, but they want to know what release of SYSPRO 8 the Business Activity Query Builder was released in. This is now a trick question for you, Nick. Do you remember?
God, it is. Oh, yeah. Well, because I've tested different iterations of it on my current release. I think they came out in 2021 R1.
That's right. 2021 R1, but it was improved in 2021 R2. So I wouldn't really,
Correct, yeah.
I would want to be on R2, to be honest, in order to be able to utilize that.
Yeah, yeah.
If you actually do me a favor, Nick, and go to your help in SYSPRO for me, please. And just a quick little tidbit for anyone that's already on SYSPRO 8 is if you want to see what's released in SYSPRO 8 based on which release, you can go ahead and take a look at highlights by release to show you, depending on the version you're on, what else new that's come out in there. So that's a little quick cheat to be able to validate that. Excellent. I've got a question here that we may have to take offline, but while we're doing that, Nick's just validating, was it 2021 R2, business activity queries?
Oh, I will just quickly see if it was in this one as well.
Yeah, I have a feeling it was 2021 R2, but we'll confirm that for you again. I'm going to jump to the next question for you, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
We are thinking of using the approval development for credit note approval. Do you feel this could work? Now that sounds like a bit of a nuance as well, so we may want to take that up and pick it up offline.
Yeah. On high level, you could definitely do something along those lines. You just have to note that you have to put the credit note on suspense of some sort to stop it being processed. So you will have to make some considerations there, but in theory, it's all possible.
As a gentleman I used to work with said, anything's possible. It just depends on how much time you've got.
Yeah.
Excellent. It seems to have answered that question well. We've knocked most of them on the head, but I will leave it open for just another 30 seconds in case someone's furiously typing away. All right, wonderful. If not, you've got our contact details to be able to piggyback on the email that you will get following this webinar to go ahead and reach out. And if there's anything that we've missed, go ahead and let us know. Otherwise, thanks very much for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you.